My name is Barbara Walter, and I have been studying civil wars for over 30 years. I started in 1989. I have traveled to many former conflict zones. I know I've studied every single war that has happened since 1946. I've collected a lot of data. I've analyzed most of the data sets. I've seen a lot of patterns that we see in other countries and that we've seen over the last 70 plus years. In 2017, I was invited to serve on a task force that's run by the CIA, and it's called the Political Instability Task Force. You can Google it. It has a Wikipedia page. One of the goals of the task force is to help the U.S. government predict what countries around the world were likely to experience ethnic conflict and civil war. The task force has had a predictive model for instability and violence since 1994. The task force is essentially made up of two types of people. Half of the task force are experts on civil war and conflict like me, and half the task force are data analysts. When they put together the model, the data analysts ask the civil war experts, tell us all the factors that you think could lead a country towards violence and civil war. And we brainstormed and we studied all the existing studies at that time. And we basically told them anything that we thought could potentially have an effect. And some of the factors that we thought might be important seemed obvious, things like whether a country was poor, whether there were large amounts of income inequality, whether it had a diverse, ethnically and religiously diverse population. Some are less obvious, like whether a country had a high percentage of what we call rough terrain, lots of mountains, or a high percent of the territory easy for rebel groups to organize and hide from the police. And it turns out we gave the data analysts 38 different factors. And they went away and they built this model, and they came back when they had what they thought was the most parsimonious one, the one that could explain or could predict with the highest rate of success the most civil wars with the least number of variables. And they came back and said, it turns out that really only two factors were highly predictive. And they weren't the two factors that the experts had expected. We were surprised. The first was something called Anocracy. That is just a fancy political science term for a partial democracy. It means it's a government that has some elements of democracy and some elements of an authoritarian regime. It's something in between. So Hungary today would be in this middle zone. Hungary has free and fair elections. Hungarians gladly go to the polls. They vote. But whoever wins the election, and Viktor Orban has been winning those elections, basically faces few institutional constraints on what he can do. That's an anocracy. The second factor is something we call ethnic factionalism. Ethnic factionalism is just a fancy political science term for an anocracy whose citizens have chosen to form political parties around identity rather than ideology. So instead of joining a party because you are conservative or liberal, communist or capitalist, you're choosing to join parties because you're black or white, Muslim or Christian. We think historically that cases serve or pro-Hunt, Sunni or Shia. If a country had those two factors, the task force considered it at high risk of ethnic conflict and or civil war, and it was put on a watch list, which was actually called the watch list, and we sent that list to the White House. So just to bring this, give you an image of what it looks like when a country has these two features. Let me give you a visual. Think about the former Yugoslavia. At the end of the Cold War, when the Soviet Union was essentially collapsing, many of the satellite states were allowed, they immediately declared independence, and they were allowed to set up whatever type of government they wanted. Yugoslav citizens very much wanted democracy. They wanted to democratize rapidly. They very quickly set up open, competitive elections, and they were on their way there. Now, the people from the old regime, people like Slobodan Milosevic, who had been a communist his whole career, understood that if he wanted to stay in power, which he very much did, he was going to have to compete in these elections. But he also knew that he had a problem. He knew that Yugoslavs knew that he was a communist, and he knew that Yugoslavs didn't like communists. So if he ran, it would be difficult for him to win. But Slobodan Milosevic was smart, and he was very strategic, and he understood that he had one advantage. Milosevic was a Serb, and the largest ethnic group in Yugoslavia was Serbian. So here we have a country that's rapidly democratizing, but is very, very early in the process. Its democratic institutions are brand new, they're still undeveloped. Elections haven't even been held at this time. This is a government that's in this middle zone. It's not fully democratic, it's not fully autocratic, it's something in between. Milosevic then adds the second variable, this ethnic factionalism variable. And he has control over state radio, state television, and he very quickly crafts a narrative which he consistently broadcasts. That is your classic scenario, a weak, unstable government that's sort of up for grabs, people feeling insecure and fearful, and then ethnic entrepreneurs stepping in to sort of stoke those flames to bring themselves to power.